So I've got another Nissan Leaf ZE1 in today for the front drive shaft TSB click work. First thing is to get the car up in the air. I use my 2-post ramp, but you can quite easily do this if you're fitter and more agile than I am. On the ground, obviously you could jack it up, put some axle stands underneath it. Next thing is to get the front wheels off. So we'll need a 21mm socket. I use a thin wall one because access can be a little bit tight on some of these wheels. I have come across some Leafs with aftermarket wheels on that use 19mm wheel nuts, but generally 21 will do. Obviously all the wheel nuts need to come off, and then it gives you a good chance just to have a peep, ideally with a torch, which I'm just grabbing, at the brake pads. Make sure everything's okay. Give the anti-roll bar links a wiggle. Check the road springs aren't broken. Have a good visual look over everything while the wheel's off. Next thing is going to be to push out the locking tab on the nut. There we go. I just put a thin bladed center punch in there. That will punch out, then I can undo the wheel nut. We can have the wheel off. I do carry new wheel nuts in stock if necessary, but generally, because they get done up tighter, the pinch point's in a different place. You'll see that later on in the video. So with my trusty center punch, I'm going to just push out the locking indentation on this, and then the axle nut can come off using a 32mm socket. I use a deep impact socket for these because they fit many different cars. And there we go, the indentation is pushed out, so I can just get the socket onto there, get that pulled off, and then going to focus on the 2 nuts here on the strut. I always use a little squirt of Worth rust off on the threads on anything I'm undoing. It's not necessarily rusty, but it sure helps to ease them off. If there's any rust or contamination in there, makes the whole job a lot easier. There's another suggestion that someone else has been in here before, because the strut to upright mounting bolts on the right hand side are put in facing forwards, and on the left hand side they're put in facing backwards. My OCD doesn't allow me to refit them like that, so when I rebuild it, both sides the threads will be facing rearwards. The strut bolts on these typically use a 18mm socket and a 21mm ring spanner. I'll buzz those out quickly, and then we can pull the hub assembly clear of the drive shaft. I'll show you a little trick for keeping it all out of the way when the time comes. So with the bolts for the upright out, you can ease this all away. The drive shaft will just push through, and as you ease the upright out and the drive shaft in, yes, correct, I forgot to remove the ABS wires just so they don't go snagging. You need to make sure you don't pull on the brake flexi too much as well, so that's sometimes worth releasing from in here if it looks like it's going to snag. But when we're done, what I use is a ratchet strap just to pull the whole assembly upwards and backwards towards the ramp. Keeps it out of the way while I'm putting on the ultra heavy duty grease, and then I can rebuild everything. The brake flex is just held in place with a little spring clip, which you can pull out with a pair of pliers. Then when that's done, you can free the flexi off, and that allows the loop here to allow a bit more length, so you can pull the caliper backwards. The alternative is to just quickly undo the caliper, and then you can hang it from the strut here. I'll show you that method on the other side. And here we are. The brake flex is released, so no snagging. The ABS wire is released, so no snagging. I've got my ratchet strap in, holding everything back out of the way, and it's been easy to release the drive shaft. Someone has been in here before. It's got some molybdenum grease on it, but it looks like they only put it on the outside here, because there's not really any sign of it here. I use a much thicker, in effect an axle grease, much thicker, much stronger. You can see on here, see if I can show you, there we go. So on the splines there's a bit of brown rusting, which shows to me that it's been moving and it hasn't had enough grease put on it before. But anyway, it'll be done properly this time, reassembled, tightened up nice and tight according to the regulations, and the noise will be gone. So there's a nice thick coating of this axle grease on the splines, and this is now ready for reassembly. I'll show you what I mean about the axle nut going back on tighter than it came off, because that's also a good sign that it's an improved job. So the bolts securing the upright are refitted and tightened up. The ABS wiring is pushed back in. A little squirt of oil helps them to slip in nicely, and I've put the retaining clip back onto the brake flexi, so all is well. I've done the drive shaft nut up, and you can see here how with a little bit of effort it's gone up tighter than it was on before, which is why I'm happy to just now punch this in, use a fresh area to lock it, and it saves having to change the nuts. There we go, so the tab is bent back in. The purists out there will say you should always change the nut, but at the end of the day the thread is perfect. That's holding beautifully. I don't see the point in incurring that kind of cost. I think they're about 12 euros each as well, so it adds substantially to the cost of doing the job. I do carry replacement nuts in stock, because quite clearly if this has been reused before, reusing it multiple times doesn't always work. Here is the Nissan part number if you need them. So yeah, I carry 2 in stock just for the occasions when they're needed. One of the other niceties I was taught many thousands of years ago when I was an apprentice was just to put a little dab of copper slip grease onto the wheel studs and around the center locating, whatever you want to call that, spigot, so that should the wheel need to come off in a hurry, say roadside or anything, and there's only a short wheel brace available, there's less chance of the wheel nuts sticking on or the wheel getting stuck to the hub with some corrosion. Just one of those little things I do. So as promised, here is the alternative method of making sure there's no stress on the brake flexi whilst doing any work on the brakes or the drive shafts. So for the want of these 2 bolts that hold the caliper to the mounting, we can take those out, and then we can just hang the caliper up with a wire clip from the springs here, and then that keeps it out of the way and saves any stress on the brake pipe. So with the bolts undone, taken out and put to one side carefully, the caliper literally will just wiggle off the brake disc like this, making sure you don't lose any of the metal shims or anything. Now it's important not to let that caliper hang under its own weight from the pipe, so I use these exhaust pipe hangers. They often come in exhaust sections when you buy them from the suppliers, so I use one of those just to hang the caliper from the road spring. You can see it there hanging, clearly no tension on the brake pipe, and then it's just a case of removing the ABS wiring from their holders to make sure there's no stress on those, and then the job is exactly the same as the other side. So I'll start by pushing out the dimple. Oh, these are tight on these ones. There we go. I'll start by pushing out the dimple on this. I'll take out the 2 upright to strut bolts, which are now the same way as the other side, so I'll make sure they go back this way. Yeah, then I'll just grease it up as I did with the other side, and then it's all finished and done with a lick of copper slip on the threads and the center spigot. On the left hand side of these cars, it's possible that the inner CV joint can get dislodged from the diff, and that will start to leak diff oil. But I generally, when the car's coming in for this job, because people tend to ignore it, I do recommend to the customer that the diff oil gets changed. So I've already drained it. It's black as your hat after only 100,000 kilometers typically, because it does get ignored. But if you don't drain it, you might have to get involved in refilling it after doing this job if you dislodge the inner joint, and therefore really might as well just do it while it's up in the air. Costs so little, saves so much. Here's another little service tip while I'm just doing this drive shaft click recall. When the upright bolts are taken out of the strut, if the upright itself drops down quite a bit, and I'll try and show it to you like that. Say it was to drop down to there, that would be a very good indication that these inner rubber bushes have basically reached the end of their life. The other side dropped down a little bit further than this, but this one's basically still staying in line. When they're brand new, it sits up at about this height. But yeah, it's a good sign that they're beginning to get a bit soft. And you can see here, as I'm letting go of the upright, it's starting to pull on the inner CV joint, taking me back to what I said earlier about the fact that it's possible to dislodge it and have diff oil leak out. Obviously, as I've already taken it out, there ain't going to be no leaking.